At the beginning of the movie, we are introduced to Henry Creedlow, a creative director for a successful magazine firm called Bruiser, as he wakes up to start another boring day in his monotonous life. First, he takes a shower and prepares to go to work while listening to The Larry Case Show, a popular radio show where people call to discuss their darkest thoughts like suicide. He does this whilst navigating through his murderous fantasies, but is awed with admiration and shocked back to reality when he hears one of the callers of the radio show commit suicide while on air. He quietly admires what he just heard and continues to walk around his house quietly so as not to wake his wife Janine, who is indifferent to his existence. Despite his best efforts, she wakes up and complains about being disturbed before going back to sleep. He then goes to the kitchen to have breakfast alone and fights with his dog, who doesn't follow his orders and has no respect for him. He leaves the house at the break of dawn, cursing his life. As he walks to the train station, his best friend and financial advisor, Jimmy Larson, cruises by in his new car and picks him up. During the ride, Jimmy tells Henry that even though his new car is expensive, some things are worth spending on, and advises him to leave freely. They get to the station, and just as Henry is about to board the train, a woman pushes him back and steps ahead of him. Then a murderous fantasy flashes through his mind, in which he beats the woman and her companion to death. He finally gets to Bruiser and moves like a ghost without anyone even acknowledging his greetings. Then his annoying and unethical boss, Milo Stiles, calls a meeting to decide a model they should use for next month's cover page, and everyone gives their opinion. Milo singles out and embarrasses Henry by making fun of his choice in front of all his colleagues, leaving him frustrated once more. After the meeting, Milo's wife Rosie, who also works at Bruiser as a photographer, apologizes for her husband's behavior and makes him feel a little better. Then Milo reminds Henry to attend the pool party he's throwing for all the employees at his and Rosie's house, together with Janine later that night. After work, Henry meets Jimmy and talks to him about discrepancies in his finances, as he just learned so much of his assets are frozen, and explains his sudden surprise by telling Jimmy that Janine is the one who oversees their finances. Jimmy calms him down and promises to check it out. That evening, Henry attends the party with Janine as requested. He feels out of place there also and spends time with Rosie and her friends in Rosie's garden, where he gets a plastic mold of his face done by Rosie, who designs masks in her spare time. Henry is impressed by Rosie's talent and the mask. She shows him all her other collections in the part of the garden she calls Garden of Lost Souls. She then advises him not to leave it blank and to decorate the mask so that people would get to know him and his personality through it, but refuses to do it for him. Henry then leaves the garden to get a drink and is shocked to see his wife in an intimate moment with Milo. He keeps what he sees to himself and returns to the garden to hang out with Rosie and her friends, who mock Milo and encourage Rosie to leave him, as she can do better. Later, Henry and Janine start their drive back home, where Henry confronts his wife with what he saw. Instead of apologizing, she berates him on how boring and how weak of a man he is for taking all the crap people throw at him, and emphasizes that it was his fault and that he had it coming. When they reach their home, she screams at him to get out and continues on her way to spend the night out, boldly telling him not to wait up. Henry furiously steps out of the car and watches her leave, while having another one of his murderous fantasies in which he brutally retaliates against her and kills her. Henry snaps out of his fantasy, calms the screaming dog, and goes to bed. The next morning, he is surprised and agitated that Janine has still not come home. He goes to the bathroom to shower and is shocked out of his mind to see the mask Rosie made for him stuck to his face. He's very confused and tries to take off the mask, but ends up bleeding profusely, as it seems the mask has become his new face overnight. Then, just as he tries to make sense of what's gone on, their maid Katie arrives. He hides from her so as not to freak her out. She starts her work. By the end of the morning, Katie finishes her work, and as she prepares to leave, he watches her steal some silver utensils and bottles of alcohol while insulting her employers in Spanish. He is furious and catches her in the act. He responds to her insults in Spanish, which surprises him as much as Katie, as he has never spoken the language before or never knew that he could. He then snatches her bag, which is now full of the stolen items, and beats her to death with it. Then, just as he grapples to understand what just happened, Janine returns home from her night out. She calls out to him, but he hides Katie's body in the garage and stays there. Thinking Henry is not home, Janine calls Milo, and unbeknownst to her, Henry listens to her phone call, where she undermines and insults her husband and plans to get away with Milo before rushing out to see him. Henry quietly follows Janine E. to the Bruiser office and watches her get intimate with Milo. But his investigation is intercepted by Rosie, who had also been suspicious of her husband's behavior, and followed him there. Rosie arrives and takes a picture of Milo and Janine in a compromising position and immediately runs out screaming and threatening that Milo is going to receive divorce papers from her lawyer before the day's out. Terrified, Milo starts running after her to the street begging for forgiveness. This chaos works out perfectly for Henry, as it leaves him one-on-one with Janine. He jumps out of his hiding and attacks Janine, who is flabbergasted by his presence, as much as his blank mask appearance. He chokes her to death, screaming about all the things she did and said to him. He then breaks the office window and hangs her down from it for everyone on the streets to see. Milo, who is now outside on the street, begging Rosie for forgiveness, hears the commotion and is horrified to look up and see Janine suspended from the 20th story window. Rosie drives off, and Milo runs to the public phone to call the police and report what's going on. Back in the office, Henry realizes Tom, a co-worker who came in to finish some work, had seen what happened to Janine. He threatens him that if he ever mentions what he saw there, he will be doomed to the same fate before managing to escape through the back door of the building. The police arrive, and Detective McCleary speaks to Milo about the events of the morning leading up to the incident. Milo describes everything, including his affair, and also that there's no one he could think of who's capable of such brutality. The detectives come to Henry's residence to inform him of his wife's death. He hides in his house and waits until they leave, as he couldn't possibly speak to them faceless like that. They leave feeling sorry for him for his loss and planning to return soon. As soon as they leave, Henry gets back to the task of thoroughly cleaning off his first murder. He then takes Katie's body to the nearby river and dumps it. He then calls the cleaning agency and informs them that the assigned maid never showed up. He goes back to his house and searches through Janine's files. He finds their financial papers and goes through them to find, to his horror, that Janine has been embezzling their money and assets with Jimmy's help. He's very disappointed and goes to Jimmy's house to confront him. They get in a fight, and the first apologetic Jimmy starts telling him how the money was more meaningful with him than it could ever be with someone like Henry. After an intense physical fight, Henry shoots and kills his longtime friend. Then police release the video of him entering the Bruiser office from the morning of Janine's murder and ask the public for their help identifying him. Rosie sees this on the news and identifies her mask as the one belonging to Henry, but she keeps this information to herself and doesn't report it to the police. Then the police come to the Stiles residence to ask Rosie some questions, as she was reported to have been there on the morning of Janine's murder. She tells them that she doesn't know anything about it, a claim that's also supported by Milo. As the police proceed to leave, they pass by the Garden of Souls and notice the masks, which doesn't sit well with them, and support their hunch that Rosie might be the suspect as the jealous wife who caught her husband having an affair and killed the woman for it. However, they can't move with their suspicion as they don't have enough evidence to support it. Elsewhere, Henry sees Tom leaving the police station and panics, thinking he identified him as the murderer, even though Tom kept his word and said nothing. Henry follows Tom home one night and brutally murders him. Henry continues listening to The Larry K. Show and starts openly enjoying all the traumatic stories people share. One day, he calls the show and tells the host that he's faceless and has murdered 4 people. The host doesn't know what to think and takes it as a hypothetical, and so he gives him a light piece of advice that's in contrast with the seriousness of Henry's situation. Realizing that nobody could understand the situation, he decides to take matters into his own hands. He then convinces himself that as soon as he takes care of all the people who wronged him, he will get his face back. He goes through that list of people in his mind and sets up Milo as his next target. Henry attends Milo's Halloween party, dressed as Zorro in a black cape and white mask face, which disguises his situation perfectly. There, he meets Rosie, who's wearing the same costume and who keeps him company for a while. However, Rosie is being trailed by Detective McCleary and his team, who are convinced she's behind the Janine murder in some way or another. Milo then sneaks away in all the chaos and rallies up some of his colleagues to lure Milo to the second floor, away from the center of the party. There, they attack Milo and suspend him from the balcony by wires. Henry tells Milo that he has set him up for a grand finale, straps small explosives around his body, and sets it off, which obliterates the man who has ruined Henry's life in more ways than one. As soon as this takes place, the mask subtly, and without Henry's knowledge, leaves his face along with the gown, and he gets his face back. He goes back downstairs, where the party is still raging on, and sees Rosie, who asks him why he has taken off his costume, which makes him realize, to his delight, that everything is back to normal. Meanwhile, Detective McCleary and his team, having witnessed the small explosion on the second floor, follow Henry down to the party, but just when they are about to apprehend him from behind, Rosie stands between them, confusing them momentarily. Henry, grateful for Rosie's interference, escapes the ordeal. Outside, Detective McCleary asks Rosie why she distracted them on behalf of Henry, but she refuses to answer and tells him she doesn't know what he's talking about. The detective pleads with her to let them know if she ever catches up with Henry again before they do. Elsewhere, after a few years, a young office messenger is seen distributing envelopes to the employees. Just as he passes by the boss's office, he's verbally assaulted by the old man who is always annoyed by something or another. He tries to ignore this and continues on his path, but the man calls him from behind to insult him some more. When the man turns to respond to the call, it's seen that his face has turned into a white blank mask.